My name is Thea, I'm 33, and last Thanksgiving I ate a filet-o-fish alone in a McDonald's parking lot while my whole family sat down to dinner without me. My mother had called 2 weeks before the holiday and told me not to come. She said I brought negativity into the house, and everyone needed a little peace this year. I didn't argue. Arguing with my mom was like charting a patient who refuses the reading. You note it, you sign it, and you move on. But what none of them knew that night was that a neighbor's phone was pointed at the kitchen window. And what I did the day after I watched that video is the whole reason I'm telling you any of this. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we sit with the quiet women who stopped explaining themselves and started keeping receipts. If a family ever made you the problem so no one would look at what they were doing, this one is going to feel familiar. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I work nights in the ICU at St. Bridget's, which means my version of a normal morning is other people's bedtime. Most days I clocked out at 7, drove 15 minutes to Cedar Hollow, and sat with my grandmother before I let myself sleep. Her name is Ruth. She's 84, sharp as a tack, and her hands don't do what she wants them to anymore. So I did them for her. I brushed her hair. I filled her pill organizer. I wrote in the little green care log I kept on her nightstand. Blood pressure, appetite, the name of the aide who was kind and the one who wasn't. Nobody asked me to do any of it. That's just how it landed. In my family, I was the one who showed up. My mother, Paula, called when she needed something and vanished when it was handled. My sister Meredith sent flowers on birthdays and forgot the rest of the year. And me, I kept the log. That morning, Ruth watched me line up her Tuesday pills and she caught my wrist with those crooked fingers. "You're the only one who asks how I am," she said. "Not what I have. The rest of them only ever ask what I have." I laughed it off. I told her she was being dramatic, which was a joke between us, because she never was. But something in the way she said it stayed with me the whole drive home. I didn't know yet that she'd been counting on me to remember it. I just knew my grandmother had started talking like a woman putting her affairs in a certain order. The first crack showed up on a Thursday, in the most ordinary way possible. Ruth was fretting about her medication fund, the little account we used for the supplements, and the good compression socks her insurance wouldn't cover. "They told me it's low again," she said. "Did you take out for the socks already?" I hadn't. I pulled up the statement on my phone right there in her room, and there it was. A withdrawal for $3,200, 11 days earlier. I stared at it the way you stare at a monitor when the number doesn't match the patient in front of you. My first thought wasn't fraud. My first thought was that I'd made a mistake. That's the thing about being the responsible one. You assume the failure is yours before you'll let it be anyone else's. I scrolled back through my own notes. I'd logged every dollar I ever moved, down to the CVS receipts. This one wasn't mine. And when I looked further up the page, it wasn't the only one I didn't recognize. There was another the month before, and one before that. Small enough that nobody watching casually would notice. Large enough that, stacked up, they'd emptied most of what Ruth had set aside for herself. I sat very still and did the math twice. Ruth was watching my face. "What is it, honey?" she asked. I told her it was nothing, that I'd sorted out. It was the first lie I told to protect her, and it would not be the last. Because somebody had been reaching into my grandmother's money, and every instinct I had as a nurse was telling me to find out who before I said a single word out loud. I did what you're supposed to do. I called the bank the next morning, before my shift, still in my scrubs at the kitchen table. I asked them to walk me through the withdrawals. I asked them to freeze the account. And that's where I ran into the wall I couldn't climb. The account wasn't just Ruth's. It was a joint account. Ruth and my mother, both owners, set up years back for convenience, after Ruth's first small stroke. I was her power of attorney and her healthcare proxy, but on this account, I was nobody. "A co-owner can withdraw funds without the other owner's authorization, ma'am," the woman told me, polite and immovable. "And we can't place a freeze at the request of a power of attorney while an account owner is competent." I asked what I could do. She said I could file a report if I suspected abuse. I could talk to a lawyer. I could talk to the other owner. I thanked her and hung up, and sat there while my coffee went cold. I understood exactly what I was looking at, and I understood I couldn't touch it. That's a specific kind of helpless. The kind where you see the danger, you reach for the brake, and the brake belongs to someone else. So I did the only thing that was mine to do. I started saving everything. Screenshots of every statement, a copy of the care log, the dates, in a spreadsheet, in a column I labeled unexplained. If I couldn't stop it yet, I could at least make sure that when the day came, the numbers would speak for themselves. I didn't know how soon that day was coming. I gave my mother the benefit of the doubt. I want you to know that, because of what came later. I didn't accuse her. I sent a careful, gentle text, the kind you'd send a difficult family member of a patient. Hi, Mom. Grandma's care account looks low, and there are some withdrawals I don't recognize. Do you know anything about them? Want to make sure her fund's okay. I read it 3 times before I sent it. I made it soft on purpose. Her reply came in under a minute. So now you're accusing me of stealing from my own mother? I hadn't said the word steal. I hadn't said her name. But she'd heard it anyway, which is its own kind of answer. I tried to walk it back. I told her I was just trying to protect Grandma. That made it worse. The next text was longer and colder, and it ended with a line I would hear again and again in the weeks to come. You have always brought negativity into this family, Thea. Always. Everyone sees it but you. I sat with my phone in my hand and felt the old reflex kick in, the urge to apologize, to smooth it, to be easy again. I didn't send anything back. Instead, I took a screenshot. Then another. It sounds cold, I know. But I'd worked enough family conflicts across enough hospital beds to know that the person who reaches for the word negativity is usually the person who doesn't want you looking at something specific. I just didn't understand yet how much she was willing to do to keep me from looking. I thought the worst thing she'd do was make me feel small. She was already planning something so much larger than that. To understand why my mother was so angry, you have to know what my grandmother had done a year earlier. After Ruth's second stroke, a small one, but enough, she'd asked me to drive her to a lawyer's office. Just me. She'd signed papers making me her power of attorney and her healthcare proxy. Not my mother, her own daughter. Me. At the time, I thought it was practical. I was the nurse. I was the one at every appointment. But Paula took it as a verdict. And maybe it was. Ruth had watched who showed up, and she'd made her choice. And my mother had never forgiven either of us for it. Meredith didn't help. My sister had opinions about Grandma's house, a paid-off 3-bedroom on Larkin Street that was worth more than anything else the family owned. It's just sitting there, Meredith liked to say, eating money in taxes. I filed it under the soft things old people say, and I forgot about it. That was a mistake I'd correct later, in a room that smelled like burnt coffee, with my whole family watching. For now, I only knew this. My grandmother trusted me, my mother resented it, and money was disappearing. The 3 of those things were about to collide. I found out the story had already left the house when my cousin Danielle texted me. Danielle and I were never close, but she wasn't cruel, and the message she sent was almost kind in its bluntness. Hey, is it true you've been taking money out of Grandma's account? Aunt Paula's really upset. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and pressed my palms flat on the counter like that would keep the floor from tilting. My mother hadn't just gotten defensive. She'd gone out and told people. She'd taken the exact thing she was doing and pinned it to my chest, and she'd done it fast, before I could get a word in edgewise. That's the part that scared me. Not the lie itself, but how prepared it was. A person who's just embarrassed gets quiet. A person who's covering something builds a story and hands it out. I texted Danielle back the truth, plain and short. I haven't taken a cent. I'm actually the one who noticed money missing. Please be careful what you repeat. She sent back a thumbs up, which told me exactly nothing about whether she believed me. And I sat in my little apartment across town and felt the strangest thing come over me. the feeling of being on trial for a crime I'd reported. My whole life I'd been the reliable one, the one who fixed things quietly. Now I was watching my own name get walked around a family like a warning. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself the truth would surface, because it always did on my unit. Eventually, no matter how the family spun it. But families aren't hospitals. And I was about to learn there was no chart in the world that would make them read it. The call came 2 weeks before Thanksgiving on a Sunday, while I was still half asleep after a night shift. It was my mother, and her voice had that smooth, rehearsed calm she used when she'd already decided something and wanted it to sound generous. "I've been thinking," she said. "It's probably best if you sit this holiday out. The whole family's been under a lot of stress, and you bring negativity into the house, honey. We just all need some peace this year." There it was again. Negativity. The word she reached for every time I got too close to the truth. I asked her, carefully, if I could at least stop by to see Grandma, even for 20 minutes, even on a different day. There was a pause, and in that pause I heard the real plan. "She's been very tired," my mother said. "It's not a good time for visitors. I'll let you know when she's up for it." I want to be clear about what that was. That wasn't a woman protecting a tired old lady. That was a woman putting herself between me and the one person who could contradict her. She wasn't just uninviting me from dinner, she was cutting the line between me and Ruth, one careful sentence at a time. I said okay. I said I hoped everyone had a nice holiday. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed in the gray afternoon light, and I understood that I'd just been managed. Handled. The way you handle a problem, not a daughter. And the quietest, coldest thought arrived and sat down next to me. If she was working this hard to keep me away from Grandma, then Grandma was exactly where I needed to be. I didn't fight the ban. I know some of you wanted me to call her back and let her have it. And believe me, I drafted that text in my head 100 times. But I've watched too many families detonate in hospital hallways to think that yelling wins anything. So I got quiet instead. And quiet, for me, means careful. First I called Cedar Hollow directly, not my mother, and asked the charge nurse how Ruth was doing. "She's fine," the nurse said. "Asking for you, actually. Said you hadn't been by." So that was a lie, too. Ruth wasn't too tired for visitors. She'd been wondering where I was. My mother had told her something to explain my absence, and I could only imagine what. Second, I saved everything again. The screenshots of the call log, the texts, the care log copied to the cloud. If I've made myself sound cold, it's because a part of me had gone cold, the way your hands go steady in a code, even while the rest of you is screaming. Third, I made a decision I didn't fully understand yet. I decided I would not spend Thanksgiving pretending nothing was wrong. I wouldn't crash their dinner. I wouldn't beg. But I also wouldn't sit home and let them narrate my life without me. I'd go somewhere, anywhere, and I'd be a person on that day instead of a rumor. It seemed like such a small act of dignity at the time. Eat somewhere, stay steady, wait for the truth to do its slow work. I honestly thought skipping one dinner was the worst thing that was going to happen to me that week. I had no idea that the worst thing and the best thing were about to arrive together in the same 30-second video. So that's how I ended up at a McDonald's on Thanksgiving. It wasn't a tragedy. I want to say that plainly, because I know how it sounds in the title, and I know some of you have eaten a holiday alone and felt the whole world watching. It's not the end of the world, it's just quieter than you planned. The place was almost empty. A young mom with a toddler, an older man reading a paper in the corner, and the woman behind the counter whose name tag said Rosa, who took one look at me in my good coat with nowhere to be and understood the whole situation without a word. I ordered a filet-o-fish and a coffee and took the booth by the window. I ate slowly. I watched the parking lot. I let myself feel it. The strange floating loneliness of a day everyone else spends surrounded. Then Rosa came over with a hot apple pie in its little cardboard sleeve and set it down in front of me. "On the house," she said. You look like you could use something sweet. I tried to pay her anyway, and she waved me off and went back to the counter like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was the kindest thing anyone in my family had done for me in a month, and it came from a stranger in a paper hat. I sat there with that warm pie and I felt, for the first time in weeks, like a human being instead of a rumor. I didn't know that across town, in my parents' kitchen, my absence had already become the evening's entertainment. I didn't know a neighbor was standing in her yard with her phone up. I just ate my pie and watched the sky go dark and let myself, for 1 hour, be okay. The message came at 8:47 that night, while I was rinsing my one plate in my little kitchen sink. I almost didn't recognize the number. It was Carol Perkins, who'd lived next door to my parents for as long as I'd been alive. Carol and I had a history most people didn't know about. 2 winters back, when her husband Frank was dying at home, I'd sat with him on my nights off so Carol could sleep. 3 nights, near the end. She never forgot it. The text said, "Thea, honey, it's Carol. I have to send you something. I thought about it all through dinner and I can't sit on it. I thought you should see what they said about you when you weren't there. I'm so sorry." And under it was a video. 40 seconds, filmed from her side yard, aimed at my parents' bright kitchen window. If you've ever gotten a message that split your life clean into a before and an after, then you know the way my thumb just hovered over that little play button. I stood in my kitchen with the water still running and I did not want to press it. Some part of me already knew that whatever was in that video, I couldn't unknow it. I'd spend the rest of my life having seen it. But I've never once, in 33 years, been able to look away from the truth just because it was going to hurt. That's the trait that made me a decent nurse and a difficult daughter. So I turned off the tap. I dried my hands on my jeans, slow, like that would buy me time. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I pressed play. Stay with me, because everything I am now started in the next 40 seconds. The video opened on my parents' kitchen, warm and gold through the glass. Everyone I was related to gathered around the good table. You couldn't see faces perfectly, but you could hear them, because Carol's phone was close and the window was cracked for the heat of the oven. There was laughter. There was the clink of my grandmother's wedding china, the set she only brought out for holidays. And then my mother's voice, raised in a toast, easy and pleased. "Honestly," she said, "it's just such a relief she didn't come. The whole night feels lighter without her." A little ripple of agreement went around the table. Somebody laughed. My father's low murmur, indistinct. And then my sister's voice, clear as anything, cutting through the warmth. "Did you make the call yet? You have to do it before she figures out the account." My mother, breezy. "Monday. It's handled. She'll be too busy defending herself to dig around." More laughter. Someone said grace. The video ended. I sat at my kitchen table and I realized my hands had gone cold, the specific cold I knew from bad nights on the unit, when your body pulls the blood inward to protect the important parts. I told myself I'd misheard. I told myself the audio was bad, that the call could be anything, that I was doing exactly what my mother accused me of, and reading darkness into a family dinner. Because that's the thing they'd trained into me over 33 years. When something felt wrong, assume the fault was in my hearing, not in them. So I did what any careful person does when the reading doesn't make sense. I didn't trust my panic. I didn't call anyone. I set the phone down on the table, I took a breath, and I pressed play again. I needed to hear it a second time, clean, without my own fear talking over it. And the second time, there was no misunderstanding left to hide behind. The second time, I turned the volume all the way up and I listened like it was a report I'd be tested on. And the words rearranged themselves into something I couldn't pretend around. "Did you make the call yet? You have to do it before she figures out the account." That was Meredith. "Monday. It's handled. She'll be too busy defending herself to dig around." That was my mother. And then, quieter, under the laughter, a phrase I'd missed the first time because I hadn't wanted to hear it. My mother again, saying, "Once the county has it on paper, They'll have to look at her, not us. The county, on paper. Look at her, not us. I sat very still and let it assemble. This was not gossip. This was not my mother venting because her feelings were hurt. This was a plan, spoken out loud over turkey, to file a report. To tell the authorities that I, the power of attorney, was the one stealing from Ruth. Not because they believed it, because it worked. If I was the one under investigation, then nobody would be looking at the joint account my mother had been draining for a year and a half. She was going to hand the police a suspect so they'd stop before they reached her. And the suspect was me. I want to tell you I fell apart. I think a healthier person would have. But something in me went very quiet and very clear, the way the unit gets quiet at 4 a.m. when there's finally nothing left to do but the right next thing. I didn't cry and I didn't call and I didn't fire off a text I'd regret. Instead, I opened my laptop. I made a new folder. I named it with the date. And I dragged that video into it. First thing, before I did anything else. Because the nurse in me knew one law that never fails a family. The person who documents first is the person who's still standing at the end. I barely slept, and by 6 the next morning I was in my car driving to Cedar Hollow. Visiting hours be damned, POA on hold or not, I needed to see my grandmother before my mother's Monday. The morning aide, Denise, knew me and let me in. Ruth was awake, propped up, watching the parking lot through her window the way she always did. When she saw me, her whole face changed. "There you are," she said, like I'd been lost. "They told me you didn't want to come." I sat on the edge of her bed and held her crooked hands, and I didn't tell her the video. Not yet. Instead, I asked her the thing that had been circling me since the night before. "Grandma, you said once you set something aside for me, that I'd know where to look." She was quiet a moment. Then she pointed one bent finger at the low cabinet under her nightstand, the one where she kept her extra blankets. "Bottom," she said. "Under the quilt. It's yours now. I think it's time." I got down on my knees and reached under the folded quilt, and my hand closed on cold metal. It was an old butter cookie tin, the blue Danish kind, dented at one corner. I lifted it out and pried off the lid. Inside, wrapped in a handkerchief, was a small stack of papers, her durable power of attorney, notarized, my name on it in black and white, her healthcare proxy, and a copy of a trust, the house on Larkin Street, placed into it, protected. And on top of it all, a single page in her shaky handwriting. "You're the only one who ever asked how I was, not what I had. If they ever tell you I didn't choose you, this says I did. Don't let them tell my life back to me wrong. Grandma." I knelt on that cold linoleum floor and read it twice. Then I looked up at Ruth, and she just nodded, once, like a woman who'd known for a year exactly what she was doing. I called a lawyer that same afternoon. His name was Alan Hale, an elder law attorney a co-worker had used for her father, and he had the calm, unhurried voice of a man who'd seen every ugly thing a family could do to itself. I told him everything: the withdrawals, the joint account, the ban, the video, the tin box. He let me get all the way through without interrupting, which is how I knew he was good. "All right," he said when I finished. "First, the accusation. Telling people you stole from your grandmother, that's slander per se. Accusing someone of a crime, that's one of the categories where the law presumes harm. You don't have to prove it wrecked your reputation. It's assumed." I asked about the video. He was careful there. "The video's useful. It shows intent. But I don't want your whole case standing on a neighbor's phone. Recordings get argued about. Paper doesn't." Then he said the thing that became my compass for the next 6 weeks. "They came at you with words, Thea. Rumors. A phone call. A report they haven't even filed yet. You don't fight words with more words. You fight them with documentation. You've got a care log. You've got receipts. You've got bank statements. Let the paper talk." He told me not to confront my mother, not to post anything, not to warn them. Let them file their report if they file it, he said. If they lie to the county, that's not just cruel anymore. That's a false report to a government agency. That's a crime. Let them walk into it. I hung up and sat with that for a long time. For weeks I'd felt like the one being hunted. Alan had just quietly handed me the thing I'd been missing. Not a weapon, a method. And a method I could work. They filed on Monday, just like my mother said they would. I found out on Wednesday, when Cedar Hollow called me. It wasn't the friendly charge nurse this time. It was the facility's social worker, and her voice was professionally neutral in a way that made my stomach drop before she finished her first sentence. Ms. Young, we've received a report expressing concern about the management of your grandmother's finances, she said. Until Adult Protective Services completes its review, we're required to place a hold on your authority to make decisions on her behalf. It's protocol. It's not a judgment. I stood in the med room at work with my phone pressed to my ear, and I understood that my mother had done exactly what she'd planned over Turkey. She'd made a call. She'd put it on paper with the county. And now the system, the same careful, cautious system I trusted, had been turned into her tool. My power of attorney, the one Ruth had chosen with her own shaking hand, was frozen on the say-so of the very people robbing her. I asked the social worker if I could still visit. As a family member, yes, she said, but not in any decision-making capacity, and I'd advise you to cooperate fully with the investigator. Fully. I told her I intended to cooperate more fully than anyone she'd ever met. It sounded strange to her, I could tell, but I meant it. Because here's what my mother didn't understand about the trap she'd built. She thought an investigation was a weapon pointed at me. She'd never once considered that an investigation is just a set of questions. And I was the only person in this family who had all the answers on paper, in a blue cookie tin and a spreadsheet I'd been quietly building for weeks. So I did the thing I'm best at in the whole world. I made it make sense on paper. I cleared my kitchen table and I worked the way I work a complicated patient. One system at a time, no skipping, no assuming. First, the money. I pulled 18 months of statements and I built a timeline, every unexplained withdrawal in its own row, dated. 3,200 here, 1,500 there. Then a run of them, closer together, as my mother got bolder. When I totaled the column at the bottom, the number sat there and stared back at me. $47,900. Gone. Almost everything Ruth had. Then I laid my own records next to it. Every dollar I'd ever put in. And I'd put in, not taken out. $6,000 of my own money over 2 years for supplements and socks and the copays Medicare left behind. I had the CVS receipts. I had the pharmacy printouts with my name on them. I had the green care log, every entry in my handwriting, every visit, every vital sign, 2 years of showing up in ballpoint ink. And then I did the one thing that turned a sad story into a case. I matched the withdrawal dates against my texts and call logs with my mother. The big withdrawal in September lined up with a message where she'd complained to me about my father's situation. The one in June came 3 days after a voicemail about a loan they had to cover. The money wasn't wandering off into thin air. It had a direction, and the direction was my parents' house. I sat back and looked at the whole thing spread across my table at 2 a.m, the columns, the receipts, the log, the tin box papers waiting one corner. My mother had spent a month building a story out of a single word. I'd spent 2 weeks building the truth out of 18 months of numbers. And numbers don't get tired, and they don't get intimidated, and they never, ever change their story. I drove to Carol's on a Saturday to thank her, and to ask her something I wasn't sure she'd say yes to. She made coffee and we sat in the kitchen where she'd nursed Frank, and I told her, gently, that I might need her. Not to attack anyone. Just to tell the truth about what she'd filmed and why. She didn't hesitate the way I'd braced for. "Thea," she said, setting down her cup. "I sat with your grandmother at more church suppers than I can count. And I sat with you the last 3 nights of my Frank's life, when not one of your relatives so much as brought me a casserole. I know exactly who you are, and I know what I heard through that window." She told me she'd already been uneasy for months. She'd seen my mother's new car, seen my father's face going gray with worry, heard raised voices carry across the yard on summer nights. The video hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been the last straw on a pile she'd been watching grow. "You tell your investigator to call me," she said. "I'll say every word of it under oath if I have to." I asked her carefully whether she understood what she was stepping into, that this would put her against neighbors she'd lived beside for 30 years. She just looked at me the way my grandmother did. "Some things you don't get to stay comfortable about," she said. I drove home lighter than I'd been in a month, because now I knew when the county's report was coming due, and I knew there'd be a meeting, all of us in one room. And for the first time, I wasn't dreading it. I was starting, quietly, to look forward to it. The Adult Protective Services investigator was a woman named Dana Ruiz, and I liked her within the first 5 minutes, which surprised me, because she'd been sent to investigate me. She was maybe 50, direct, with the unbothered patience of someone who'd heard every version of every family story. She came to my apartment because I asked her to, and I had the table set, not with food, with evidence. "Most people I visit want to tell me about their feelings," she said, looking at the neat stacks. "You've got columns." "I'm a nurse," I told her. "I chart." She sat down, and I walked her through it the way I'd walk a new doctor through a complicated patient. No editorializing, just the timeline, the withdrawals, my deposits, in the other direction, the care log, the receipts. The dates lined up against my mother's own texts. Ruiz asked good questions and wrote things down and didn't tip her hand, which I respected. When I got to the trust papers from the tin box, she paused. "This trust, the house is protected in here?" "Placed in it a year ago," I said. "My grandmother's signature, notarized. My mother doesn't have access to it, and she doesn't know it exists." Ruiz made a note and underlined it. Then she looked up at me. "I want to be straight with you, Ms. Young. I don't decide who's a good person. I follow the money. That's the whole job." "Investigator Ruiz," I said, "following the money is the only thing I've been asking anyone to do for 6 weeks." She almost smiled. She gathered copies of everything, gave me her card, and told me the county would be scheduling a meeting with the family and the facility to review findings. "You'll want to be there," she said. I told her I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. My mother found out there was an investigation, of course, because Ruiz had to interview her too, and that's when the texts started coming. Not calls. She was too smart for calls now. Texts. Long ones, at all hours, and I saved every single one without answering a word. "I cannot believe you would do this to your own family. You've torn us apart over a misunderstanding about money. Your father is sick with stress because of you." And, inevitably, the old refrain, dressed up for the occasion. "This is exactly the negativity I was talking about. You destroy everything you touch. I hope it's worth it." A month earlier, that word would have gone straight through me. Negativity. It had run my whole life. Every time I'd swallowed a concern, softened a truth, made myself smaller so the room would stay calm. But it lands differently once you've watched a 40-second video and totaled a spreadsheet. Now the word just sounded like what it had always been. A hand over my mouth. I didn't argue. Alan had been clear. Don't engage. Don't explain. Don't give her a single sentence she can screenshot and twist. So I did the hardest thing for a woman raised to keep the peace. Nothing. I let her texts pile up unanswered in a thread I was quietly forwarding to my lawyer. Every accusation she fired at me was one more piece of paper in a file that was starting to bury her. She thought my silence meant she was winning. She'd always read my silence that way. She never understood that a nurse's silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone watching the monitor, waiting for the number that tells her it's time to act. My sister tried a different angle. Meredith called me, actually called the first time in months, with a voice full of warmth so fake I could have charted it. "Thea, this has all gotten so out of hand," she said. "We're family. Nobody wants this dragged through the county." I said very little. I've learned that people who are working an angle can't stand a silence. They rush to fill it, and they fill it with things they shouldn't say. Meredith filled it right on schedule. "Look," she said, "if you'd just tell them you overreacted, that it was all a big misunderstanding, we could get the report withdrawn. Mom could call it off. This could all just go away." And there it was. Get the report withdrawn. Mom could call it off. In her hurry to sound reasonable, my sister had just confirmed, on a call I wasn't even recording, that the report was a lever they controlled. Something they'd chosen to file and could choose to unfile, depending on whether I behaved. Not a genuine concern reported by worried relatives. A weapon with a switch. I kept my voice even. "So the report would go away if I said I was wrong," I said. "And it stays if I don't." A pause. She heard it too late. "That's not... I didn't mean..." "It's okay, Meredith," I said. "I understand you perfectly now." I hung up before she could repair it. My hands were steady. Because a month ago they'd made me feel crazy for seeing a plan where they swore there was only a family. And my sister, trying to manage me, had just described the plan out loud. I didn't need to trap anyone. They kept doing it to themselves, one careless sentence at a time. I saw my father one more time before the meeting, and it's the part of this I still turn over at night. I'd gone to Cedar Hollow to sit with Ruth, and in the parking lot I saw his old Buick, and him in the driver's seat, not moving. I walked over. The window was down. My father, 63 years old, was sitting there with his hands loose in his lap and tears running down his face, talking to himself, or to God, or to no one. "Didn't know it'd go this far," I heard him say. "Just needed to get through the year." He saw me and didn't wipe his face, which told me how far gone he was. "Thea," he said, "I never wanted this. You have to know that. The business, the loan." I was drowning. "Your mother said she'd handle it." I didn't ask how. And for one moment I saw him clearly. Not a villain, just a proud, frightened man who'd let his shame make his choices for him, who'd looked away while his wife emptied her own mother's account to plug the hole he'd dug. For one moment I almost softened. Then I asked him the only question that mattered. "Dad, are you going to tell Investigator Ruiz that? All of it? The truth?" And his face closed like a door. He looked back at the windshield. He put the car in reverse. "It's complicated," he said, and he backed out and drove away and left me standing in the cold. That's the thing about the near sympathy moments in a story like this. They're real. The tears were real. But a real tear doesn't undo a signed report. He'd had the truth right there in his mouth and he'd swallowed it to protect himself. I stopped feeling sorry for him somewhere around the exit sign. 2 days before the meeting, Alan called with the piece that turned my careful timeline into something my mother could not talk her way around. Ruiz's investigation had authority I didn't. She'd subpoenaed the actual bank records, the ones behind the statements, the ones that show not just the amount but the hand on the withdrawal. The unauthorized withdrawals were all made through online banking or a debit card, Alan told me, and the login credentials and the card both trace to your mother. Not to you. Your name isn't on a single one of them. I sat down. I'd known it in my bones, but knowing it in your bones and seeing it in a subpoenaed record are two different kinds of certain. "There's more," he said. "There's a transfer. $14,000 out of your grandmother's joint account into an account belonging to your father. Dated 3 days before a loan payment on his failed business. The dates match, Thea. They line up exactly. Everything my father had confessed in that parking lot, the bank had just confirmed in ink. The drowning business, the loan. Your mother said she'd handle it. She'd handled it by robbing an 84-year-old woman and then blaming the one grandchild who'd noticed." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," Alan said, "we don't do anything dramatic. We walk into that meeting on Thursday and we let Investigator Ruiz present what she found. You don't accuse anyone. You don't raise your voice. You just bring the tin box and the file and you let the paper do exactly what paper does. I thanked him and hung up and looked at the blue cookie tin sitting on my counter. 6 weeks of feeling like the accused, and it came down to this. On Thursday, the family that put me on trial was going to find out who'd actually been holding the evidence the whole time. Alan gave me a choice the night before, and I want to tell you about it, because it's the part I'm proudest of. We don't actually need the family meeting, he said. I can send Ruiz's findings to the county. We clear your name in writing, restore your POA, and you never have to sit in a room with these people again. Quiet, clean. You come out spotless and you never see their faces. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. 6 weeks of exhaustion wanted the quiet exit. But I thought about Ruth in her wheelchair, who'd been told her whole life to sit down and let other people narrate it. I thought about the word negativity, and how it had only ever worked because it happened where no one could contradict it. At dinners I wasn't invited to, in phone calls to relatives, over a turkey with the window cracked. Lies live in private. That's their whole habitat. No, I told Alan. I want the meeting. I want it in a room, with all of them there, and with my grandmother there. Not to punish them. I'm past that. I want the truth said out loud in the same place the lie was born, so my grandmother hears it with her own ears. Alan was quiet for a second. You understand that's harder on you, he said. Yes, I said, but it's easier on her, and she's the one who's had to sit with this the longest. He didn't argue. He just said, then that's what we'll do. I hung up and laid my clothes out for the morning like it was a shift. Something plain, something steady. And I put the tin box by the door where I couldn't forget it. 6 weeks I'd waited for the room. Tomorrow, finally, I'd walk into it. The meeting was in a small conference room at Cedar Hollow, the kind with a long fake wood table and a coffee maker gurgling in the corner and fluorescent light that makes everyone look tired and honest. I got there early. Ruiz was already setting out folders. Alan sat beside me with his briefcase, and then, one by one, my family came in, and I watched them arrive, believing they'd won. My mother swept in first, dressed like it was church, her chin up, her whole face arranged into the wounded dignity of a woman about to be vindicated. My father came behind her, gray and small, not meeting my eyes. Meredith last, phone in hand, already looking bored, like this was a formality between her and Grandma's house. They thought this was the meeting where the county would finally strip me of my authority for good. They thought they'd walk out with control of Ruth's care, her account, her home. My mother actually gave me a small, pitying smile as she sat down, the kind you give someone you've already beaten. I didn't smile back. I didn't glare either. I just sat with my hands folded on the blue cookie tin in front of me, the way Ruth used to fold her hands in church. Then the door opened one more time, and an aide wheeled my grandmother in. Ruth. Dressed up, hair done, sharp-eyed, taking in the whole room in one slow sweep. My mother's face flickered. She hadn't expected Ruth to be here, present, watching. Ruth's chair was set at the head of the table where she belonged. She found my eyes and she gave me the smallest nod, and I felt the whole thing settle in my chest, calm and cold and certain. They'd built this room to bury me in. They just hadn't checked who was bringing the file. Ruiz opened by explaining the purpose of the meeting, calm and procedural, and my mother didn't even wait for her to finish. She'd come to perform, and she performed. Before we go any further, she said, dabbing at a dry eye, I just need everyone here to understand how hard this has been. My daughter has taken advantage of my mother's trust. She's had access to that account. She's the so-called power of attorney, and the money is gone. I've raised this child. I know what she's capable of. She turned to Ruth, softening her voice into honey. Mama, I'm so sorry you have to hear this about her. I tried to protect you from it. Meredith nodded along, murmuring support on cue. It was a good performance. 6 weeks earlier, it might have even worked on me. That's how practiced it was, How smoothly she wore the role of the wounded mother defending a helpless grandmother from a greedy nurse. I watched my grandmother's face while my mother spoke. Ruth didn't react. She just watched her own daughter lie about me, with those sharp old eyes, and something in her jaw went very still. My mother finished and folded her hands and looked at Ruiz expectantly, waiting for the county to agree with her. Alan, beside me, didn't move. He'd told me how this would go. Let her build it as high as she wants, he'd said. The higher she builds it, the farther it falls. So I let her have her moment. I sat quiet with my hands on the tin, and when Ruiz turned to me and asked evenly, "Ms. Young, would you like to respond?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just opened the lid of a dented blue cookie tin, and I started laying the truth on the table, one page at a time. I stood up, because Ruth had spent her life being talked over sitting down, and I wasn't going to answer for her from a slouch. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not going to argue with my mother," I said. "I'm just going to show you what's true." I set the first page on the table. This is 18 months of Grandma's account. Every withdrawal I didn't make is highlighted. It comes to $47,900. I set down the next. These are my deposits. $6,000, my own money, going in, not out. The next. This is my care log. 2 years of visits, in my handwriting, and these are pharmacy receipts with my name on them. My mother started to speak, and Ruiz raised one hand, not unkindly, and my mother stopped. I kept going, quiet and even, laying it down like cards. This is a copy of the durable power of attorney my grandmother signed a year ago, her signature, notarized. And this, I set down Ruth's handwritten page, the last thing out of the tin, is a note she wrote me, in case anyone ever told me she didn't choose me. The room had gone very still. My mother's face was doing something complicated, and I looked right at her, and I said the thing I'd been carrying for 6 weeks, and I said it softly, because it didn't need any volume at all. "You told everyone I bring negativity into this family." I let it sit for a second. What I actually brought was documentation. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Meredith had put her phone down at some point without noticing. My father was staring at the tabletop like it might open up. And Ruth? Ruth was looking at me with her chin lifted and her eyes bright and wet, the way you look at someone who finally said the thing you'd waited your whole life to hear said out loud, in a room where it counted, where nobody could pretend they hadn't heard it. Then Investigator Ruiz opened her own folder, and the room learned that I hadn't been working alone. "I'll share the county's preliminary findings," she said in that flat, careful voice that's so much heavier than shouting. "We subpoenaed the underlying bank records." She laid out her own pages beside mine. "The unauthorized withdrawals over the past 18 months were made using online credentials and a debit card registered to Paula Young." My mother's mouth opened. Ruiz kept going. Not fast. Not slow. "There is also a transfer of $14,000 from Ruth Delano's account into an account held by Gary Young, 3 days before a business loan payment." My father made a sound low in his throat. "As for the report alleging financial abuse by Thea Young," Ruiz said, and here she looked up, "we found no supporting evidence. Ms. Young's name does not appear on any of the disputed transactions. Her records are consistent and complete." She closed the folder. "I want to be clear with everyone in this room. Filing a knowingly false report with a county agency is not a family disagreement. It's a criminal matter. This case is being referred to the district attorney's office, along with our findings on the financial abuse." I watched it land. I watched the exact moment my mother understood that the trap she'd built for me had a door that only opened inward. She'd filed a report to point the law at me, and the law had followed the paper, calmly, all the way back to her own front door. She looked around the table for an ally and found none. My father had his face in his hands. Meredith had gone the color of the fluorescent light and was very carefully not looking at anyone. And Ruth sat at the head of the table with her hands folded, watching her daughter's whole performance collapse under the weight of the truth. And she did not look away. Not once. The accuser had become the accused, and she'd done every bit of it to herself out loud over a turkey. With the window cracked. That's when my mother stopped performing, and the real one came out. "This is a setup," she said, and her voice cracked up out of its honeyed register into something raw. "You've all turned on me, every one of you." She was on her feet now, palms flat on the table, leaning into it. "I did what I had to do for this family. Nobody else stepped up. Nobody." She jabbed a finger at me across the table. "And you always thought you were better than us. Little Thea, the nurse. So perfect. Always judging. You've wanted this from the start." The louder she got, the smaller the room made her look. I stayed in my chair. I kept my hands folded. I did not give her the fight she was reaching for, because I finally understood that the fight was the only thing that could save her now. If she could make me yell, make me ugly, then we'd just be two women screaming and the paper on the table wouldn't matter anymore. So I didn't. I let her burn alone. When she finally ran out of breath, the room was dead quiet except for the coffee maker. And into that quiet I said the only thing I had left to say to her, and I said it gently, almost kindly, because I meant it more as an ending than a wound. "You called it negativity because," she started asking questions was harder to say out loud. She had no answer for that. There wasn't one. And then I turned away from my mother, for good, and I looked instead at the one person in that room I'd walked in there for, my grandmother, who was already reaching for my hand. Ruth took my hand, and her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. Then she did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. She spoke. Not to me, to the whole room, in that thin, clear voice that made everyone lean in, the voice of a woman who had been quiet for 84 years and had decided she was done being quiet. "I chose Thea," she said. Every head turned. "I sat in that lawyer's office a year ago, and I was in my right mind, and I chose her. On purpose." She looked at my mother then, her own daughter, and her face held something that wasn't anger and wasn't quite forgiveness. It was just truth. Finally unafraid of the table it sat at. "Because she's the only one who ever asked how I was," Ruth said, "and not what I had." She let that settle over all of them. Then, softer, but with iron under it, "Don't you ever say I didn't know what I was doing. Don't you dare tell my life back to me wrong." Nobody spoke. My mother sat down slowly like her legs had stopped agreeing with her, and my grandmother squeezed my hand once, the way she used to when I was small and scared of storms, and just like that, the storm was over. 6 weeks of it, ended by an old woman in a wheelchair who'd waited her whole life for permission she finally decided to stop needing. The paperwork moved slower than the movies would have you believe, but it moved. My power of attorney was restored within the week, in writing, with an apology from the facility I didn't need but appreciated. Adult Protective Services made its finding official, financial exploitation of an elder, and forwarded the whole file to the district attorney, where my parents now had lawyers of their own and a very different kind of holiday season ahead of them. The bank opened a dispute over the unauthorized withdrawals, and a good chunk of Ruth's money started slowly to come home. I asked the court to appoint an independent conservator to manage the finances going forward, not me, on purpose. I didn't want to be one more relative with a hand near Ruth's account. I wanted a neutral professional and a clean set of books, so that no one could ever do to her again what my mother had done. Meredith stopped speaking to me, which I've made my peace with. My father sent one text months later. "I'm sorry." And nothing since, and I've never answered it, because some sorries are just the sound a person makes when the consequences arrive. And my mother? My mother learned that the words she'd used to run my whole life had finally met a room full of paper, and paper doesn't flinch, and paper doesn't get tired, and paper never once cared how much negativity she said I carried. The numbers had a direction the entire time. I just made sure that, in the end, everyone had to follow them all the way to the door they led to. The next Thanksgiving, I didn't sit at my parents' table, not because I was banned this time, because I chose not to. There's a difference, And it took me 33 years and one blue cookie tin to learn it. You don't have to keep asking for a seat at a table where they only want you when you're useful and gone when you ask questions. So I signed Ruth out of Cedar Hollow for the afternoon, and I bundled her into my car, and I asked her where she wanted to go. She thought about it and grinned like a girl. "Somewhere they don't make you dress up," she said. So I took her to McDonald's. The same one. Rosa was working the holiday again, and when she saw me walk in pushing a wheelchair, she remembered. I could see it land on her face. We got 2 hot apple pies and a booth by the window, and Ruth held her pie in both crooked hands like it was the good china, and we watched the sky go dark together. It was the best Thanksgiving of my life, and there wasn't a single person at that table who wanted anything from either of us. If a family ever calls you negative, listen closely. Because sometimes, "she brings negativity" is just the polite family word for, "she started asking questions we couldn't answer." That's my story. One video through a kitchen window, one tin box under a bed, and one grandmother who remembered, out loud, exactly what she chose. If someone in your life keeps a careful record of everything you supposedly do wrong, start keeping your own. Quietly. Today. Not to attack anyone. Just so the truth has somewhere to stand when you finally need it to. If this reminded you of someone, share it with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.